He called it my stupid little hobby. My husband, Greg, said I would never make anything of myself without him. He was half right. I couldn't do it until I lost him. Now, thanks to a $1 million deal, that little hobby just bought his entire company. My name is Alara Vance, and this is how I served revenge in the very boardroom he used to destroy me. My name is Alara Vance, and at 38 years old, I had become an expert in holding my breath. The air in our dining room was thick, heavy with the scent of roasted duck and expensive wine. It was a pressure I knew well, the kind that builds when Gregory is performing. This house, all polished oak and inherited silver, wasn't truly mine. It was a Vance heirloom, just like the cufflinks on my husband's wrists. I was just another one of his acquisitions. Greg, at 42, was in his element, holding court with senior colleagues from Apex Strategic Partners. He laughed, a booming sound designed to signal confidence, and refilled a glass for his boss. Marcus Thorne. I smiled, kept the platters full, and tried to disappear into the beige damask wallpaper. Marcus, a man with a face like expensive leather, turned his attention to me. The sudden spotlight felt like an interrogation lamp. "And Ilara," he said, his voice smooth. "Greg tells us you're the creative one. What is it you do, exactly?" I felt a small, genuine spark. This was my territory. I cleared my throat, ready to explain the unique sourcing process for Vance artisans, the digital marketing funnels I'd built from scratch. "I own a business," I began. "A curated online gallery for bespoke leather goods." "She has a shop," Greg cut in, laughing. He didn't even look at me. He waved his hand dismissively, as if clearing away smoke. "A little online shop. Sells crafts. You know, purses, belts. It keeps her busy." The word crafts landed like a slap. Busy landed like a second. A hot, prickling shame washed over my face, creeping down my neck and under the collar of my silk blouse. I could feel the eyes of the other wives, the polite, empty smiles. I had poured 5 years of my life, my sweat, and the last of my mother's inheritance into Vance artisans. It wasn't a hobby. It was my lifeline. I looked across the table for an ally, my eyes landing on my best friend, Sophia Hayes. She was, of course, here. Greg always insisted on inviting her. Sophia met my gaze and gave me that look, the one I used to think was empathy, a slight downturn of her lips, a quick, sad blink, the look that said, "Oh, you poor thing. He's such a handful." It felt practiced. It felt false. I said nothing. I just smiled, the perfect supportive wife, and murmured, "He's right. It's just a small thing." The words tasted like ash. The rest of the dinner was a blur of financial jargon and hollow laughter. I floated through the motions, clearing plates, offering dessert, my mind replaying Greg's casual assassination of my work. Hours later, as the party finally wound down, I was in the kitchen scraping plates when I heard their voices from the foyer, low and conspiratorial. Greg and Sophia. They must have thought I was still upstairs. "She's completely clueless about real business," Greg said. His voice was different now, stripped of the forced joviality, flat and cold. "Just a little more patience. It's almost done." "He's under a lot of pressure, Alara," Sophia said, her voice suddenly emerging into the kitchen as she rounded the corner, feigning concern. "The Apex quarterly report is brutal. He didn't mean it." "Of course," I said, forcing another smile. "I know." She squeezed my arm. Her touch felt electric. "Wrong. You're a good wife, Alara. He's lucky to have you." When the last guest finally left, and the heavy front door clicked shut, the silence of the house was louder than the party. I mechanically loaded the dishwasher, my hands shaking with a dull rage I couldn't place. Greg was already upstairs, probably passed out. I retreated to the small study I used as an office, sinking into my chair. I just wanted to look at my own numbers, my sales projections, something to remind myself that what I did was real. I opened my laptop. An email was waiting at the top of my inbox. Sender Amalgamated Leatherworks, our primary supplier, the best in the business. Subject termination of supply agreement. My blood went cold. I clicked it open. Regret to inform you. Thorough review of our partners. Unable to continue our relationship with a vendor demonstrating such clear financial instability. Effective immediately. Financial instability. We had never missed a payment. I had just secured a Net 30 account with them. This was impossible. It was a death sentence. This would halt production on my entire spring line. I felt dizzy, the room tilting. How could they know who my eyes darted to the corner of the desk? Greg's tablet. He'd left it here, unlocked. He never left it unlocked. A notification was glowing on the screen. A message from Sophia. My hand trembled as I touched the screen. The message thread opened. It wasn't just one message. It was weeks of them. My gaze locked on the last one, sent just an hour ago, while she was squeezing my arm in the kitchen. Sophia. It's all set. Apex will get that supply contract. Her shop will be bankrupt within the month. I scrolled up. Greg. Amalgamated just confirmed. They're cutting her off tonight. She'll get the email soon. Sophia. Perfect. Marcus will be thrilled. See, I told you her supplier list was gold. Greg. You did good, Soph. Meet me at the hotel tomorrow, 10. Sophia. Always. The floor dropped out from beneath me. The two betrayals slammed into me at once, twisting together into a single, monstrous truth. It wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just my husband sleeping with my best friend. This was a coordinated attack. They were not just laughing at my business, they were actively, methodically gutting it from the inside out, using my own work to prop up his failing company. The humiliation at the dinner table wasn't an accident. It was a celebration. I stood there, surrounded by the quiet hum of a house that was never mine, and I finally, truly, stopped holding my breath. I was suffocating. I sat in the dark study, the glow of the tablet illuminating the wreckage of my life. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming, rewinding the last 10 years, searching for the first lie. It wasn't hard to find. The entire foundation of our marriage was built on it. I had been a rising star in the New York design scene. My name was on a junior partnership track. I had momentum. I had a future. Then I met Gregory Vance. He was charming, ambitious, and had this grand vision of conquering the financial world in Chicago. He sold me a dream of partnership, of building an empire together. All I had to do was move. All I had to do was sacrifice my career for his. It's just for a few years, Alara, he'd promised, packing my sketches into boxes I'd never open again. Once I make partner at Apex, you can do anything you want. We'll have it all. I believed him. I traded my Soho studio for this sprawling, empty suburban house. The first year was a blur of his anxieties. Apex wasn't the sure thing he'd claimed. He was struggling, drowning in a sea of sharper, more ruthless colleagues. He came home one night, his face pale. They were restructuring, and his position was vulnerable. That's when I offered it. My inheritance from my mother. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. $50,000. Just to get you through, Greg, I'd said. A little bridge. He kissed me, calling me his savior. The money vanished into the Apex void. He got his promotion a month later. I realize now, I didn't give him a bridge. I bought his loyalty to a company that was already consuming him. Vance Artisans was born in the damp chill of the basement, next to the water heater. It started as an act of sanity. I needed to make something, to feel the grain of leather under my hands, to smell the dye, to create something tangible that wasn't Greg's dinner or a perfectly managed social calendar. I started with one handbag, then a wallet. I launched a tiny website, and to my shock, things began to sell. Greg was supportive, in the way one supports a child's lemonade stand. "That's so cute, honey," he'd say, patting me on the head as I packed boxes late into the night. "Look at you, my little entrepreneur." When I landed my first wholesale account, I was ecstatic. I drafted a business plan, projecting how we could scale, how this could become a real, profitable company. I presented it to him in this very study. He'd scanned it, a small smile playing on his lips. "Ilara, this is ambitious, but let's be realistic. You don't know the logistics, the overhead. It's too risky. Why spoil a perfectly good hobby? It's making you happy. Isn't that enough?" I deflated. He was the finance expert, after all. He must know best. He was just protecting me, protecting us. Then Sophia entered the picture, a whirlwind of digital expertise. I'd met her at a sterile Chamber of Commerce mixer. She was a freelance web designer, hungry and smart. When I mentioned my business, her eyes lit up. "Your site is functional, Ilara, but it's not selling you." She'd insisted over coffee. "You need a full e-commerce backend, proper SEO, a real database. Let me build it for you. No charge. Consider it a favor, from one woman in business to another." I was stunned by her generosity. A professional build-out like that would have cost me $10,000. She spent weeks with me, migrating my data, redesigning the interface. She insisted on having full admin access, just to manage the backend and optimize the supplier portals. I gave her the keys to my entire kingdom, my customer lists, my supplier contracts, my pricing structures, my sales data. I had handed my best friend the very weapons she would use to execute me. The borrowing started small. "Ilara, baby, I'm in a bind," Greg would say, leaning against the door of my studio. "Apex has this emergency expense, a client dinner, and my corporate card is maxed. Can I just borrow $500 from the Vance Artisans account? I'll pay you back double on Friday." Friday never came, but the requests did. 500 became 1,000. 1,000 became 5,000. Just to cover a payroll shortfall at the office. He always had a plausible, urgent reason. It was always an apex emergency. I was the supportive wife, wasn't I? His success was my success. I see it now. I wasn't funding his success. I was plugging the leaks in his sinking ship. He wasn't borrowing from my hobby. He was siphoning the profits from my viable business to keep his fraudulent one afloat. Every piece of helpful advice was a carefully placed barrier. When I wanted to hire a part-time assistant, an unnecessary expense, "Ilara, you can handle it." When I found a cheaper, better supplier, "Don't rock the boat, honey. Loyalty is everything in this business." The loyalty he meant, of course, was to Amalgamated, the supplier he and Sophia were planning to steal. He didn't just dismiss my strategies as naive. He actively sabotaged them. He and Sophia, the two people I trusted most in the world, had been standing over me, watching me build my dream, all while drawing up the blueprints for its demolition. They hadn't just watched me work, they had studied me. My hobby wasn't just keeping me busy, it was keeping him solvent. And now, it was apparently the only thing of value left to plunder. The humiliation at dinner, the condescension, the stupid little hobby, it was all a cover. A lie told so often. Perhaps he'd even started to believe it yourself. But the tablet in my hands, with its cold blue light messages, told the truth. This was never about love or support. It was a long, cold, calculated heist, and I had been the perfect, unsuspecting victim. I walked back upstairs, the tablet in my hand feeling heavier than a tombstone. The sun was just beginning to cast a sick, gray light into the bedroom. Greg was asleep, snoring softly into the 1,000-thread-count pillowcases. He looked peaceful, innocent. I didn't scream. My voice, when it came out, was a low, frozen thing. "Wake up, Greg," he grunted, pulling the duvet tighter. I ripped the covers off the bed. "I said, wake up." He sat up, blinking, his hair mussed. "Ilara, what the hell, He squinted at the clock. "It's 5:30 in the morning." What is wrong with you? I tossed the tablet onto his lap. It clattered against his hip. The messages. Sophia. Amalgamated Leatherworks. Explain it. He stared at the glowing screen. I watched the sleepiness drain from his face, not replaced by panic or guilt, but by a cold, weary irritation. He sighed, as if I had interrupted an important meeting. So you found out, he said. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, rubbing his face. Frankly, I'm surprised it took you this long. I guess this just moves up the timeline. The casualness of it, the absolute lack of remorse, stole my breath. Moves up the timeline. You're destroying my business, my life. You're sleeping with Sophia, my best friend. He actually scoffed, standing up to pull on the expensive silk robe I had bought him for our 10th anniversary. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Alara. It's just business. This is the real world, something you've never been able to understand. Apex needed that supply contract. Your little craft shop didn't. It was a liability. My craft shop, I repeated, the words choking me. The liability you've been borrowing from for 2 years to prop up your failing company? He stopped and turned to look at me. His eyes were completely dead. You are too sentimental. You always have been. You don't have the stomach for what it takes. Sophia gets it. She sees the bigger picture. I see the bigger picture. And what is that? I whispered, though I already knew. Me. Winning. He walked to the bedroom door, then paused. This marriage is over. Alara. It's been over for years. I want you out. Out! The word sounded stupid. Greg, this is my home. No, he said, his voice flat and final. This is my family's home, and you are no longer family. Pack a single bag. My lawyer will be in touch about your things. Don't take anything of value. He left the room. I heard him go downstairs to make coffee, as if it were just another Tuesday. The week that followed was not just hell. It was a systematic demolition. I was standing on the dew-covered lawn with one suitcase and my laptop bag by 7 a.m. I used my phone to call an Uber to the cheapest motel I could find near the city. The moment I checked in, I tried to access our joint checking account. Access denied. He had already been to the bank. He had locked me out. I tried my personal savings account. Balance $4.12. He had drained it. Every last dime. Transferred out late last night while I was staring at his tablet. I had exactly $220 in cash in my wallet. That was it. I sat on the musty motel bed, opened my laptop, and logged into my business dashboard, my hands shaking so hard I could barely type. I had to warn my clients, try to find another supplier. Anything. The first email at the top of my inbox was from the Kensington Collective, my largest wholesale client, the New York order, the one that was supposed to fund my entire year, the one Sophia had helped me secure. Regret to inform you, effective immediately. We must cancel our fall collection order in its entirety. The order was worth $60,000. I had already paid for half the raw materials to fulfill. It paid for them on credit, a line Greg had encouraged me to open. The cancellation didn't just wipe out my projected income. It instantly plunged me $10,000 into debt. Then the notifications began, a flood of them, hitting my website at once. 1-star reviews, 2, 10, 20, all posted in the last few hours. Cheap fake leather. The dye ran and ruined my clothes. Scam artist I paid 2 months ago and never received my product. Awful customer service. Owner is unstable. They were all fake, all orchestrated by Sophia. She knew my system. She was burying my 5-star reputation in minutes, ensuring that even if I survived the supply cut, I'd have no customers left. I had to get to my workshop. It was the only place I had left. It was a small, leased industrial space across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Or so I thought. I took 2 buses to the industrial park. I saw the notice from the end of the block. A huge, fluorescent yellow sticker plastered across the steel door, flapping in the wind. Notice of seizure. I ran, my legs weak. A thick, new padlock was chained around the handles. The legal notice was taped above it. The bank had seized the property. I didn't understand. I had paid the rent every month, but Greg, with his financial savvy, had insisted on signing the lease himself. "It's better for our taxes, honey," he'd said. I paid the rent, but his name was on the document. And what I didn't know was that he had used that lease my workshop as collateral for a short-term, high-interest business loan from Apex. And, of course, he had intentionally defaulted on the payments. Everything was inside. My custom-built cutting tables, my 2 industrial-grade sewing machines, my entire inventory of finished handbags, all my patterns, my mother's antique tool set, everything I owned, padlocked, seized by his creditors, gone. In my last, desperate act, I called our friends. I called Sarah, my supposed best friend after Sophia. Her husband worked under Greg at Apex. Her voice was cold, distant. "Alara, listen, I heard about what's going on. Greg told us how unwell you've been, all the spending, the instability. I think it's best if we don't talk for a while." He had poisoned them all. He had painted me as a spendthrift, a crazy wife who had squandered their money on a hobby. They believed him. Why wouldn't they? He was Greg Vance, the finance wizard. I was just the quiet, artsy wife he'd been dragging along. Within 30 days, my life was unrecognizable. The $200 was long gone. I sold my wedding ring and the earrings my mother left me just to make a deposit on a tiny, mold-infested studio apartment in a part of town I used to lock my car doors in. The single window faced a brick wall. I had no husband. I had no friends. I had no home. And I had no business. I was 38 years old, sleeping on a bare mattress on the floor, and I was, in every sense of the word, erased. My new life had a smell. It was a combination of burnt coffee, industrial bleach, and the damp, sour odor of the alleyway behind the studio apartment. I was 38 years old, and my primary function in the world was to ask, "Would you like room for cream?" I worked the 5 a.m. shift at a 24-hour coffee shop on the other side of the city. The work was numbing, anonymous. My hands, which were meant to sketch, cut, and stitch, now just gripped a portafilter and wiped down sticky laminate countertops. I would come home around 2 in the afternoon, my cheap polyester uniform smelling of stale grease, and collapse onto the mattress on the floor. The single window in my apartment faced a brick wall, which meant the room was always in a state of perpetual dusk. The rage I felt that first week had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, heavy deposit of shame. I was invisible, erased. Greg, Sophia, Apex. The house with the oak-lined dining room, it all felt like a movie I had watched about someone else. My mail consisted entirely of collection notices, bills for debts I didn't even know I had, all forwarded from my lawyer, who was handling the divorce I couldn't afford to fight. I'd stopped opening them. They went into a cardboard box in the corner, my personal archive of failure. One Tuesday, I came home, my feet aching, and found a different kind of envelope on the floor. It hadn't been mailed. It had been slipped under the door. It was made of thick, heavy, cream-colored cardstock. It felt expensive, like a memory. The return address was Sterling, Cole, and Ash, attorneys at law. My first thought was that Greg had found some new legal torment. I ripped it open, my hands shaking. It was a single curt letter. It informed me, with profound regret, of the passing of my godmother, Matilda Shaw. The name hit me so hard I had to sit down on the edge of the mattress. Matilda, my mother's brilliant, terrifying, and fiercely independent best friend, the woman who had first taught me how to tool leather, the woman whose hands smelled of tannins and beeswax, a certified legend in the craft who had, decades ago, turned her back on the commercial world to live and work in near total seclusion. I hadn't seen Matilda in 15 years. Not since the night I'd introduced her to Greg at my engagement party. She had watched him, her eyes sharp and assessing. Later, she'd pulled me aside by the champagne fountain. "He is a hollow man, Ilara," she'd said, her voice low and rough as gravel. "He's all polish and no core. He doesn't see you. He sees an asset. Do not chain yourself to a man who will one day envy your fire." I had been 23 and in love. I'd told her she was wrong, that she was cynical. I'd accused her of being jealous of my happiness. I had chosen Greg. She'd looked at me with a profound, final sadness, finished her drink, and walked out. She never answered another one of my calls. Now, she was gone. The letter stated that Matilda had left no formal will, but that I was the sole beneficiary of her effects. It requested I contact the office to retrieve them. The effects turned out to be a single, small manila envelope. The lawyer, a kind-eyed man named Arthur Cole, slid it across his vast mahogany desk to me. "Ms. Shaw was particular," he said gently. "She liquidated all her known assets years ago. This was all that was left in her safe deposit box." I opened the clasp. Inside, there was no check, no bank book, just a single, heavy, old-fashioned skeleton key, its iron dark and oily to the touch. Tucked next to it was a folded piece of her thick, monogrammed stationery. One sentence, written in her sharp, unmistakable angular script. "Don't let the mediocre extinguish your fire. I saw him coming." I turned the envelope over. On the back, an address was scribbled. A warehouse in the old tannery district. A derelict. Industrial part of the city I hadn't visited since I was a child. It took 2 bus transfers to get there. The building was an anonymous brick monolith, its windows boarded up, its steel roll-up door painted with fading graffiti. The address numbers were barely visible. The key slid into the ancient, rusted lock. It took both my hands to turn it, the tumblers grinding with a sound like a scream. The heavy door rolled up, complaining loudly, revealing a cavern of darkness. I stepped inside. The air was cold, thick with the smell of dust, curing oils, and decades of aged leather. It was the smell of Matilda. It was the smell of home. I found a light switch. A bank of old fluorescent lights flickered on, humming, one by one. The space was vast, at least 5,000 square feet, and it was full. Everything was draped in heavy, dust-covered canvas tarps, like a landscape of sleeping giants. My hand was trembling as I reached out and pulled the corner of the nearest tarp. It was a workbench, a massive, 12-foot-long, custom-built cutting table, its surface scarred and worn smooth from decades of use. I moved to the next one, pulling the sheet. A floor-to-ceiling shelving unit, stacked to the top with rolls of leather, not just any leather. French calfskin, American bison, Italian bridal leather, hides that cost hundreds, even thousands, of dollars apiece. I ran, pulling tarps away. An industrial-grade Fortuna splitting machine, a clicker press, 2 Adler heavy-duty sewing machines, a wall of antique brass hardware, another wall holding hundreds of hand tools, each one oiled and resting in a custom-cut slot. This wasn't a storage unit. This was a shrine. It was a fully equipped, professional-grade leather workshop that made my old, seized studio look like a child's playset. Matilda hadn't been a recluse. She had been working, silently, building her own world in this brick shell. At the very back, under a single hanging bulb, was a heavy, steel tanker desk. It was locked. All the drawers were locked, but the small brass key that had been taped to the back of the envelope in my hand slid perfectly into the central drawer. It slid open with a well-oiled whisper. Inside, there were only 2 things: a thick, leather-bound ledger and a small, black external hard drive. I opened the ledger. It was filled with her handwriting. Not notes, not sketches, transactions, dates, names, figures. It was a complete record of her shadow business. and the numbers were staggering. I pulled my own cheap laptop from my backpack, my heart hammering against my ribs. I plugged in the hard drive. A single encrypted file appeared on the screen. A password box popped up. I typed in Matilda. Access denied. I typed in her birthday. Access denied. I stared at the screen, frustrated. Then I looked at the note still clenched in my other hand. I saw him coming. My fingers, numb from the cold, moved slowly over the keys. I typed the one, absolute truth that had defined my new life. The one thing I knew for certain. Gregisaliar. I hit enter. A folder opened, revealing dozens of files. The top one was a video, dated 2 weeks ago. The title was For Alara. I sat there on the cold concrete floor, the glow of the laptop screen painting my face in the darkness. My fingers, numb, clicked on the folder labeled PI Report Master. It was a digital abyss. Subfolders were organized by date, quarter, and category. Financials, surveillance, audio, associates. The dates on the root folders went back 5 years. 5 years. Matilda had hired a private investigator the month I announced I was moving to Chicago with Greg. I clicked the first file. Executive Summary Final PDF. It was not a guess. It was not a suspicion. It was a 20-page, bullet-pointed, and meticulously cross-referenced indictment of my entire marriage. Matilda, from the very beginning, had seen the hollow man, and she had started keeping receipts. The evidence was clinical, brutal, and undeniable. The affair with Sophia was just the ugly appetizer. The report confirmed it with surveillance photos, hotel receipts, and text logs that made my stomach heave. But that wasn't the headline. The headline was Apex Strategic Partners. According to the investigator's forensic accounting, Apex was a glittering, gold-plated fraud. Greg wasn't a rising star. He was a desperate gambler who had lost big. The company was dying. It was leveraged to its eyeballs, bleeding clients, and drowning in bad investments. Greg hadn't been borrowing from my company for Apex emergencies. He had been embezzling from his own partners, from his clients. He was funneling money through shell accounts, one of which was registered to S. Hayes Designs, Sophia's freelance company. He was desperate. The report estimated Apex had 6 months, maybe 8, before the whole rotten structure collapsed. Suddenly, the dinner party, the humiliation, it all made a terrible, sickening sense. It wasn't just casual cruelty. It was a corporate strategy. I clicked on a subfolder, Project Vance Artisans Acquisition. My blood turned to ice. It was a complete business plan, authored by Sophia, using my back-end data she had full access to. It detailed a plan to restructure Apex by launching a new, high-margin lifestyle division. My division. The plan was simple 1. Systematically sever Alara Vance's supply lines, Amalgamated Leatherworks. 2. Use their new leverage to absorb that supply contract for Apex. 3. Poach her largest client, the Kensington Collective, using inside knowledge of her pricing. 4. Use Sophia's admin access to launch a smear campaign, destroying the brand's reputation to prevent recovery. 5. Bankrupt Alara, forcing her to abandon the brand. 6. Relaunch Apex Artisans 6 weeks later, using my designs, my suppliers, and my client list. It was all there, a step-by-step guide to the assassination of my life. They weren't just cheating on me, they were liquidating me. Then, I saw the audio folder. My hand hesitated. This was different. This wasn't data. I clicked a file dated 2 months prior, labeled G. Vance S. Hayes Office. The audio was crystal clear. A bug in Greg's office. I heard the clink of glasses. Greg's voice, smooth and relaxed. She's just so earnest. She genuinely believes her passion is a business. She's sitting in that damp basement gluing pieces of leather together, thinking she's building an empire. Sophia's laugh. God, that laugh. The laugh I had shared secrets with over countless bottles of wine. Her passion is about to pay for our new condo. Greg, her supplier list is gold. Marcus is ecstatic. Once we get the Kensington contract, the board will finally get off your back. Just a little longer, Greg said. We drain the last of her operating capital, let the suppliers cut her off, and the whole thing implodes. We file for divorce, cite her instability and reckless spending. By the time she realizes what happened, Apex Artisans will be launching its first line. Then Sophia, her voice dropping, intimate. And what about her? There was a pause. I could hear him take a drink. Her, Greg said, and the tone of his voice is something I will hear in my nightmares forever. It was bored. We've cut the fool. She'll have nothing. No business, no money, no friends. She's a 38-year-old hobbyist. What's she going to do? Get a job at a coffee shop? I slammed the laptop shut. The echo of his voice hung in the cold, dusty air. Get a job at a coffee shop. The nausea was overwhelming. I bent over, dry, heaving onto the concrete. The humiliation, the calculated, cold-blooded cruelty. He had planned this. He had planned to leave me with nothing. He had planned my current life, right down to the polyester uniform. When the sickness passed, something else took its place. A feeling so cold and hard it felt like a shard of ice was forming in my chest. It wasn't grief. It was validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't a naive hobbyist. I was a victim. And this hard drive was a confession. I opened the laptop again, my hands perfectly steady. There was one other folder I hadn't opened. Trust Account Alara. It contained a single PDF, a letter from Arthur Cole, the lawyer I had met just hours ago. It was a formal notification. Upon Matilda Shaw's death, a private trust account held in her name was to be immediately activated, with the sole beneficiary being Alara Vance. I scanned down to the final balance. $100,000. My breath hitched. It was seed money. It was life. Taped to the bottom of the hard drive. I found one last folded note from Matilda. I hadn't seen it before. This is not a gift. This is ammunition. Use it. I looked at the hard drive, a complete record of their crimes. I looked at the bank account, a war chest. I looked around the massive, silent, perfectly equipped workshop. This wasn't a tomb. It was an armory. Greg had left me penniless, sleeping on a floor, working for minimum wage. He thought he had erased me. He thought I was a fool, a hobbyist, a sentimental child. He had no idea. He had just declared war on a woman who had nothing left to lose, and who had just been handed a $100,000 bullet. I quit the coffee shop the next morning. I walked out in the middle of the 6 a.m. rush, leaving my apron on the counter, and never looked back. The first check I wrote from the trust account was not for a new apartment or new clothes. It was a retainer for Arthur Cole. I sat in his office, the same one where I had received the key. But I was not the same woman. I placed the hard drive on his polished mahogany desk. Mr. Cole, I said, my voice quiet and steady. The letter you gave me said my godmother passed from natural causes. I believe you, but she was a woman who was preparing for a war. I am her sole beneficiary, and that war is now mine. I told him everything. Greg, Sophia, Apex, the theft, the seizure. I left out no humiliating detail. He listened, his face impassive, steepling his fingers. Then, he plugged the hard drive into his own secure terminal. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the office was the soft click of his mouse. He read the PI's summary. He scanned the bank records. He clicked on one of the audio files, listened through his headphones, and his eyebrows shot up to his hairline. He finally unplugged the drive and looked at me, his kind eyes now sharp. Assessing. Ms. Vance, he said, what you've brought me. Bombshell is an understatement. This is a complete, documented case of conspiracy, wire fraud, embezzlement, and intellectual property theft. The district attorney would have a field day. Good, I said. Let's file. Let's arrest them. No. He held up a hand. Not yet. A criminal case is a blunt instrument. It's messy, and the outcome is out of your hands. Greg and his partners will lawyer up, bury this in motions, and paint you as a bitter, vengeful ex-wife. They'll claim the audio was illegally obtained, that the data is circumstantial. But it's the truth, I insisted. The truth is often irrelevant, Arthur said, a hint of steel in his voice. These men like your husband, don't fear jail. They fear humiliation. They fear poverty. They fear irrelevance. You don't want to just win. You want to annihilate. And to do that, we must wait for the perfect moment to strike. We wait for them to get overconfident. We wait for them to make one more fatal move. His advice was agonizing. It meant letting them, for now, get away with it. It meant letting them launch their apex artisans with my stolen designs. But he was right. My anger, which had been a wild, burning fire, now cooled. It hardened, solidifying into a cold, dense, patient focus. I had ammunition, as Matilda said. Arthur was teaching me how to aim. The first thing I did was legally dissolve Vance Artisans. I shed the name like a contaminated skin. In its place, I filed the incorporation papers for Shaw Legacy Designs. It was a shield and a promise. I was my godmother's heir now, and I would behave accordingly. Then, I went to work. I moved out of the slum studio and into a small, clean apartment, but I didn't furnish it. I bought a bed, a coffee pot, and a hot plate. Every other cent of Matilda's $100,000 was for the business. My days became a blur of relentless, focused labor. I was in the workshop at 5 a.m. and often didn't leave until well after midnight. The space was my fortress. I learned the hum of the Adler sewing machines, the precise weight of the clicker press. I breathed in the smell of the leather, and it felt like I was breathing in Matilda's strength. I wasn't just recreating my old business. That business was weak, vulnerable. It had been a hobby. Shaw Legacy Designs would be a weapon. I ignored my old customer list. I didn't try to win back the clients Greg and Sophia had stolen. They were small fish. I was hunting for a whale. I threw out all my old designs. They were tainted, stolen. They belonged to the past, to the woman I was. I sat at Matilda's heavy steel desk for 3 days, sketching, tearing up paper, sketching again, fueled by coffee and a quiet, burning rage. I had to create something they could not copy, something they could not even comprehend. The idea came from the fusion of us, Matilda's craft, my modern practicality. I would create a line of handbags, but with a secret. I researched. I made calls. I took apart wireless chargers and battery packs. I taught myself how to solder. The result was the Matilda, a classic, structured satchel, crafted from the finest French calfskin, with lines so clean they were architectural. But hidden within the lining, seamlessly integrated into the structure itself, was a flat panel, high-capacity wireless charging system, a smart bag, a luxury item that solved a modern problem. It was the perfect synthesis of old-world craft and new-world technology. I looked at Matilda's ledger. It wasn't just a record of her sales. It was a black book of her connections. The suppliers listed in her book weren't the ones you found online. They were old-world, multi-generational tanneries in Italy, private hardware forges in Germany. These were artisans who worked on handshakes, who had no websites. They were people Greg, with his Apex spreadsheets, didn't even know existed. I called them. I introduced myself as Matilda Shaw's goddaughter. The name opened every door. They sent me their best. For 2 months, I was a ghost. I built 5 perfect prototypes of the Matilda bag, in 5 different colorways. I designed packaging. I built a sleek, secure, minimalist website, using none of Sophia's code. I watched, from a distance, as Apex Artisans launched. Their bags were exactly what I expected cheap knockoffs of my old designs, using inferior leather from Amalgamated, promoted with flashy, desperate marketing. I saw Sophia's face in a trade magazine, touted as their new star designer. They were chasing my past, while I was building my future. I didn't launch. I didn't post on social media. I took the last of my seed money and did one final thing. I booked the smallest, most expensive booth I could get at the International Design Trade Show in New York, the one place where the biggest luxury buyers in the world, the real decision makers, would be. Arthur's words echoed in my head. We wait for the perfect moment. I packed the 5 prototypes into a custom-built aluminum case. As I locked it, I caught my reflection in the dark workshop window. The woman looking back was not Ilara Vance. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. Her eyes were tired, but they were not sad. They were cold, they were focused, and they were, for the first time in my life, completely, dangerously, ready. The main floor of the Javits Center was a sensory assault, a roaring ocean of noise, flashing screens, and the desperate energy of 1,000 vendors all vying for the same thing. My booth was a tiny island of quiet in the middle of it all. Shaw Legacy Designs was exactly 10 feet by 10 feet. I had spent a quarter of my remaining funds on the location, a high-traffic corner, and the design, which was the opposite of everything around it. The walls were stark, gallery white. The lighting was a single, dramatic spotlight. In the center, on a minimalist white pedestal, sat one bag, the Matilda, in a rich, oxblood calfskin. There was no signage, no branding, just my name, Ilara Shaw, in small black letters on the back wall. It was arrogant, it was confident, and it was the biggest gamble of my life. I didn't have to look for them. I could feel their presence. 50 feet away, the Apex Strategic Partners booth exploded into the aisle. It was enormous, at least 40 by 40, draped in obnoxious silver and blue, with 3 different video monitors all playing a loop of Sophia, smiling, holding up my old designs. It was a monument to theft, loud, gaudy, and desperate, and they were there, Greg and Sophia, holding court. Greg, in a suit so expensive it looked like armor, and Sophia on his arm, in a red dress, her hair perfect, laughing that laugh. They looked like the king and queen of the prom. I turned back to my pedestal, focusing on the grain of the leather, wiping a single imaginary speck of dust from the brass clasp. I could feel his eyes on me before he moved. Well, look who it is. I didn't flinch. I slowly turned. Greg was standing just outside my booth, a champagne flute in his hand, a look of utter mocking disbelief on his face. Sophia hung back a few feet, a smug, pitying smile on her lips. I have to say, Ilara, I'm impressed. I didn't think you had it in you, he said, gesturing around my empty-looking space. Still playing at crafts. I see. What's the theme here? Zen and the art of bankruptcy. The old Ilara would have dissolved. She would have stammered, or cried, or tried to defend herself. I simply looked at him. I gave him nothing. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just waited. His smile faltered, just for a second, annoyed by my lack of a reaction. Good luck, honey, he sneered. You're going to need it. He turned and walked back to his booth, and I turned back to my pedestal. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. He is a hollow man. For 2 hours, people walked by. They glanced in, confused by the lack of product, and moved on to the flashing lights of Apex. I stood my ground. I waited. Then, they arrived. A group of 4, 2 men and 2 women, all dressed in that specific, quiet uniform of extreme wealth. No logos, perfect tailoring, an aura of absolute, unhurried power. They weren't browsing. They were scanning. They bypassed the Apex booth without a second glance and stopped, as one, at my space. The lead woman, sharp, with silver hair cut into a severe bob, stepped inside. Her eyes went straight to the bag. "This," she said, her voice clear and low. "Tell me." I didn't pitch. I demonstrated. I ran my hand over the seamless stitching. I opened the magnetic clasp, revealing the hand-skived interior. Then, I took my personal phone, its battery at a low 20%, and placed it in the dedicated side pocket. I touched a tiny, almost invisible brass stud on the bag's gusset. On the minimalist display, a small digital screen showed my phone's battery icon light up, charging. The woman's eyebrows rose. No wires, no battery pack. "The technology is woven into the lining itself," I said, my voice as calm as if I were discussing the weather. "The panel is flexible, paper thin, and charges on a conductive mat overnight. It holds 72 hours of power, old world craft, new world function." One of the men leaned in. "My God, the applications for our guest experience packages." "This is the Viceroy Group," the woman said, not as an introduction, but as a statement of fact. "We are particular. Our clientele expects seamless luxury." She tapped the bag. "This is seamless. This is smart. What's your production capacity?" I saw him before I heard him. Greg. His face a mask of panicked charm, practically running over from his booth. Sophia was trailing, her smugness replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Adriana," Greg boomed, extending a hand to the woman. She looked at it, unimpressed, until he was forced to awkwardly lower it. "Greg Vance, Apex Strategic Partners. I'm so glad you're stopping by our section of the show. We have an entire new lifestyle line launching, just for partners like Viceroy." Adriana gave him a cold look. "We weren't stopping. We are here." Greg's smile was pure plastic. He saw her interest in my bag and moved to intercept. As a friend, I feel it's my duty to warn you. I know this designer. Personally." He lowered his voice to a confidential, concerned whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's a brilliant artist, of course, but she's unreliable, a history of financial instability. We've tried to help her, but she's not really in a position to handle a major contract. It's a sad story, really." He was painting me as the crazy, unstable wife, the hobbyist, the fool. The old Alara was gone. The new Alara waited. I let the silence hang, thick and toxic. Adriana and her team looked at Greg, who was sweating now, his concern looking desperate. Then, they looked at me. I was composed. I had not moved. I waited until he had finished, until his words had nowhere left to go. Then, I spoke, my voice cutting through the noise of the trade show. I looked directly at Adriana, not at him. Innovation, true innovation, does not come from imitators. I laid one hand on my bag. This is the future. It's the only one in this entire building. Then, I nodded, just slightly, in the direction of his loud, gaudy booth, where my old stolen designs were on full display. That is the past. The choice, of course, is yours. Adriana's face was unreadable. She looked at Greg, his smile frozen, his desperation palpable. He had attacked a person. I had defended a product. She turned her back to him, a complete, brutal dismissal. She pulled a slim, black metal business card from a case and slid it onto the pedestal next to my bag. "My office," she said. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring your full business plan. Do not be late." She and her team turned as one and walked away, leaving me alone in the booth with Greg. He was staring at her card, his face pale, his mask of charm finally, utterly, shattered. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new, unfamiliar emotion. It wasn't pity, it was hatred, and it was fear. The Viceroy Group's headquarters were not on a street. They were in the sky. Their offices occupied the 70th floor of a glass and steel needle overlooking Central Park. At 9:55 a.m., I was announced. I wore a simple, severe black dress I had bought for $300, the last of my personal cash. I carried the aluminum case with the prototypes and my laptop. I was led into a boardroom that was less a room and more a declaration of financial dominance. A single 30-foot slab of black marble seemed to float in the center, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the city far below. Adriana and her team of 3 were seated. There was no coffee, no water, no small talk. "Ms. Shaw," Adriana said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "We are pressed for time. You have our attention." I did not open the case. Not yet. I placed my laptop on the cold marble, connected it to their massive hidden screen, and stood. "Good morning. Yesterday, you saw a product," I began, my voice clear and amplified by the room's acoustics. "You saw a handbag with a unique feature, but you weren't asking about a handbag. You were asking about capability. You wanted to know if I was, as Mr. Vance suggested, unstable. You wanted to know if I could deliver." The screen lit up with my first slide. It was not a picture of a bag. It was a flowchart. "Shaw Legacy Designs is not a startup," I said. "It is the activation of a 50-year legacy." This was not a design pitch. It was a business plan. It was Matilda's plan, modernized by me. I had spent weeks in that warehouse, not just sewing, but studying her ledgers. They weren't just accounts. They were a roadmap. She had left notes in the margins, strategies for scaling, warnings about logistics, contacts for fulfillment. I laid it all out. The secure, exclusive supply chain built on Matilda's private network of tanneries. A tiered production model, detailing how I could mobilize her dormant network of master artisans, scaling from 500 units a month to 5,000 within 90 days. I presented a quality control protocol that was ruthless. I presented a cost analysis, a logistics and fulfillment plan, and a 3-year growth projection that was ambitious but backed by data. I didn't just show them a bag. I showed them a fortress, a vertically integrated, scalable, and completely secure manufacturing operation that Greg, with his mainstream suppliers, couldn't even touch. After 30 minutes, I finished. I closed the laptop. The room was utterly silent. Adriana stared at the blank screen. She did not consult her team. She slid a single heavy stock paper across the table. It was a term sheet. "We do not invest in products, Ms. Shaw. They can be copied. We invest in partners and in secure, exclusive supply chains. That we understand." She tapped the paper. "We want exclusivity. Total exclusivity on your integrated charging technology for 12 months. We want to co-brand a Viceroy edition of the Matilda bag. It will be the new signature VIP gift at all our global flagship properties." I read the terms. They were demanding. They were aggressive. They wanted control. And at the bottom of the page, I saw the number. "In exchange," she said, her voice flat, "we are offering a $1 million contract. 50%, $500,000, will be paid upon signing to finance mobilization. The remainder will be paid upon delivery of the first tranche. $1 million. The words just hung in the air. It was not a number. It was a judgment. It was the sound of a gavel striking down. It was the sound of my entire past being rendered obsolete. I looked up from the paper. The old Alara would have wept with relief. The new Alara folded her hands on the table. "The exclusivity terms are robust," I said, my voice betraying nothing. "But they are acceptable. My lawyer, Arthur Cole, will review the final draft. But in principle, Adriana, you have a partner." For the first time, she smiled, a thin, genuine smile of respect. "Good. Welcome to the Viceroy Group." The news did not leak. It exploded. Someone in that meeting, or just outside it, talked. By the time I had returned to my hotel, the trade show floor was buzzing. By that evening, it was the headline on every design and finance blog. "Overnight sensation Shaw. Legacy Designs lands 7-figure Viceroy exclusive. The hobbyist's revenge unknown designer snubs Apex. Wins $1 million deal." My tiny, quiet booth was mobbed. I had to hire security just to manage the line of buyers and press, all desperate to see the bag that had won the war. I was, as they said, an overnight success. They had no idea what a long, dark night it had been. Arthur Cole finalized the contract in 48 hours. I flew back to Chicago, walked into his office, and signed my name, Alara Shaw, on the signature line. The next morning, I logged into the new Shaw Legacy Designs business account. For 2 months, the balance had been dwindling, a terrifying countdown clock. Now, a new number was there, a pending wire transfer, $500,000. It was real. It was breathing room. It was power. It was the bullet in the chamber. Meanwhile, in Greg's world, the missile had landed. He and Sophia had bet everything on the Viceroy deal. It was their last chance lifeline, the massive, legitimate cash infusion they desperately needed to hide the black holes in Apex's books from their investors. They hadn't just lost. They had lost to me, the unstable wife. The clueless hobbyist Greg had publicly humiliated. The investors, the ones Greg had been lying to for years, heard the news, and they started asking the one question Greg couldn't answer. How did a one-woman startup with no history beat an established firm like Apex to the biggest luxury deal of the year, and why was Greg so desperate to sabotage her? The attempt to paint me as financially unstable had backfired catastrophically. It had shone a blinding spotlight on his own finances, at the exact moment he was most vulnerable. I was in the warehouse, the wire transfer cleared, the contract signed, when Arthur called. "The Apex partners are in full-blown panic," he said, his voice crisp. "They've called an emergency board meeting. They're overriding Greg. They've demanded an immediate independent audit of the lifestyle division and all of Greg's personal expense reports." They were exposed. They were wounded. They were turning on each other. I stood in the center of Matilda's vast workshop, surrounded by the tools of my new life. I had the capital. I had the contract. And I had the truth. I held the phone to my ear. "Arthur," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a new skiving knife. "They're bleeding. It's time." "I was hoping you'd say that. Alara, are you ready?" "Now," I said. "Let's begin." The moment I gave Arthur the order, the world began to move at his speed. He had been waiting, the entire dossier loaded, the legal arguments pre-written. He was a predator who had been given permission to hunt. The offensive was launched on 2 fronts, with devastating clinical precision. First, the public attack. At 9 a.m. on a Monday, Arthur Cole filed the civil suit. It was a $100 million declaration of war against Apex strategic partners, against Gregory Vance, and against Sophia Hayes. I saw the press release he sent out. The charges were listed like an autopsy report: conspiracy to commit fraud, intellectual property theft, tortious interference, embezzlement. The lawsuit itself, which Arthur made publicly available, was a masterpiece. It used my own money, my own stolen data, and my own trust against them, citing the very meetings and transactions they thought were secret. This was the loud, bright explosion designed to draw all their fire, while their lawyers and the media were scrambling to download the civil suit. Arthur made his second silent move. He, in his capacity as the executor of Matilda Shaw's estate, hand-delivered 2 identical encrypted hard drives. One went to the district attorney's office. It was accompanied by a cover letter pointing to the specific, undeniable evidence of wire fraud and embezzlement. The second went by bonded courier directly to the regional head of the Securities and Exchange Commission. This one highlighted the massive ongoing investor fraud, the cooking of the books, and the specific audio file where Greg and Sophia discussed their plan to use my stolen IP to mislead the Apex board and prop up their failing stock price. Greg was expecting a fight over alimony in a quiet divorce court. He got a federal case. The effect was instantaneous. The Apex investors, already terrified by the Viceroy debacle, read the civil suit. They saw the words SEC and embezzlement. The emergency audit they had demanded was no longer a negotiation. It was a desperate race. The independent auditors, now armed with the specific allegations from Arthur's suit, knew exactly where to look. They found the shell accounts in 3 hours. They found the illegal wire transfers to S. Hayes Designs. They found the gaping black holes in the client ledgers, the money Greg had borrowed to cover his catastrophic losses. It was all there. Greg hadn't even been clever. He had just been arrogant, convinced he was surrounded by fools. I was in the workshop, not celebrating, but working. The $500,000 advance was sitting in my account, and I had $1 million contract to fulfill. I was calibrating the tension on the new Adler machine when my phone, resting on the steel desk, began to vibrate uncontrollably. It wasn't one call. It was a flood of push alerts. The Chicago Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. I wiped the machine oil from my hands and clicked the top link. The headline was simple: Apex Strategic Partners raided by federal agents. CEO Gregory Vance arrested. There was video, shaky footage, shot by a terrified employee from a window across the street. The pristine, glass and steel lobby of the Apex building was a swarm of dark suits and blue jackets. Then, a live feed from a news van. The camera was zoomed in tight on the revolving front doors. The anchorwoman was speaking, her voice fast and urgent. Allegations of a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Sources confirm at least 2 arrests. And then, he emerged. Gregory Vance. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his tie gone. His face, the face I had known for 12 years, was a pale, slack mask of disbelief. He looked confused, like a man who had woken up in the wrong house. His hands were cuffed behind his back. The arrogance, the confidence, the casual cruelty, it was all gone. He just looked small. A moment later, Sophia was brought out. She was a wreck. Her expensive red dress from the trade show was crumpled. She was weeping hysterically, mascara carving black tracks down her cheeks. She looked at the cameras, her mouth open in a raw, animal sound of terror. She saw her entire future evaporating, and it broke her. I watched them, the hollow man and his accomplice, be guided into the back of 2 separate, unmarked black cars. I watched my husband, the man who called my work a stupid hobby, have to duck his head as a federal agent pushed him down onto the seat. I turned the sound off. The rest was a formality. The newsfeed updated. Marcus Thorne, Greg's boss, the man who'd smirked at me at the dinner table, had been suspended by the board, effective immediately. Arthur had, of course, included the audio file of Greg and Marcus laughing about my financial instability as they planned the theft. Marcus knew. He was complicit. The SEC moved faster than I thought possible. Citing the overwhelming and pre-organized evidence of systemic fraud, they obtained an emergency court order. They froze every asset. Apex Strategic Partners, Greg's personal accounts, his trust funds, Sophia's accounts, everything. The company's credit lines vanished. Their operating capital ceased to exist. They couldn't make payroll. They couldn't pay their rent. The company did not wind down. It imploded. In 48 hours, it was over. The shining tower Greg had built on my stolen dreams and his clients' money was a smoking crater. The remaining partners, facing their own indictments, turned on each other, blaming everyone. But it was too late. The creditors, the banks, the clients he'd stolen from, they descended. They filed for involuntary Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The court order was final. Apex Strategic Partners would not be restructured. It would be liquidated. Everything. Every desk, every server, every leased car, every single patent and piece of intellectual property. It would all be sold at auction to the highest bidder. I closed the laptop. The vast, dusty workshop was quiet. I stood up, walked over to the new cutting table, and unrolled the first hide of perfect ox-blood calfskin. I had a deadline to meet. The auction was not held in a grand ballroom. It was held in a fluorescent-lit, soul-crushing conference room in a budget hotel near the airport. The air smelled of stale coffee and desperation. This was not a place for victors. It was a morgue, and the attendees were vultures, picking over the carcass of Apex Strategic Partners. I spotted him immediately. He was sitting alone in the third row, in a cheap plastic chair that buckled under his weight. Gregory Vance. He had made bail, but he was a prisoner nonetheless. His $1,000 suit was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting polo shirt and wrinkled khakis. His face was puffy, his skin a pale, sickly gray. He wasn't the charismatic titan of finance anymore. He was just a man, a failed, broken man, waiting to watch his past be sold for parts. Sophia was nowhere to be seen. The news reports, and a quiet word from Arthur, suggested she had taken a plea deal. She had probably given them Greg, the company, and Marcus Thorne on a silver platter in exchange for a lighter sentence. She had, as always, seen the bigger picture. The doors at the back of the room opened. I did not slip in. I walked in. I was not the victim. I was not the wife. I was Alara Shaw, the CEO of Shaw Legacy Designs, and I was here to close a deal. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back, and on my feet were $4,000 heels I had paid for with the first profits from the Viceroy contract. My lawyer, Arthur Cole, walked beside me, carrying a slim leather briefcase. We didn't sit in the back. We took 2 seats in the front row, directly in the auctioneer's line of sight. I felt his eyes on my back. I could feel the burn of his hatred, the sheer, dumbfounded shock. I did not turn. I did not give him the satisfaction. I simply sat, opened my auction catalog, and waited. The auction was a pathetic affair. Lot 1, 25 ergonomic office chairs, by Herman Miller. They sold for 10 cents on the dollar. Lot 2, the complete server bank, by Dell. A tech reseller from New Jersey bought it for scrap value. They auctioned off the coffee machines, the water coolers, the framed generic art that had lined the halls, and even the dying ficus trees from the lobby. Greg watched every sale, a fresh humiliation, as his empire was dismantled, chair by chair. Finally, after an hour, the auctioneer cleared his throat. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the final lot of the day, Lot 701. He sounded tired. This is the alpha asset. It includes the entirety of the company's intellectual property, all registered patents, trademarks, digital assets, client lists, and the master brand name Apex Strategic Partners. It also includes the assumption of the master lease for the 20,000 square foot office on the 45th floor. He looked around the room. A truly turnkey opportunity. We will open the bidding at $250,000. Silence. No one moved. No one coughed. The brand wasn't an asset. It was toxic. The name was synonymous with fraud, with federal arrest, with total catastrophic failure. The client lists were worthless, and the lease was a multi-million-dollar liability. The auctioneer forced a smile. That's a very attractive starting point. Do I hear $250? Nothing. All right, let's get this moving, he said, his voice strained. Let's open the bidding at $100,000. $100,000 for the whole package. Folks. More silence. A man in the back actually laughed. Greg sank lower in his chair, his face burning red. This was the final insult. His life's work wasn't just worthless. It was a joke. $50,000, the auctioneer called out, his voice now desperate. Someone give me $50,000 just to start. Arthur Cole, without looking at me, gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I raised my paddle. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a diamond. $50,000. Every head in the room snapped toward me. The auctioneer froze, his mouth open. Greg's head shot up. He stared at me, his eyes wide, a terrible, dawning comprehension on his face. He didn't understand. Why would I buy his poison? The auctioneer stammered. I have $50,000 from Paddle 99. Do I hear 55, $55,000? He looked around the room. The vultures weren't interested. They were just here for the chairs. Going once, the auctioneer said, staring at me. Greg was shaking his head, as if trying to wake himself from a nightmare. Going twice. It was just me and him. The entire room had disappeared. Sold? The gavel cracked, the sound echoing like a gunshot, for $50,000 to Shaw Legacy Designs. Arthur stood and went to sign the papers. I stood, but I did not go to the desk. I turned, and I walked the 2 rows back to where Greg was sitting. He was a statue of ash. He stared up at me, his face a ruin of hatred, bewilderment, and for the first time, true, abject fear. He was finally seeing me. Not the stupid hobbyist, not the sentimental wife. He was seeing the woman who owned him. He expected me to yell, to spit on him, to cry, to demand an apology. I did none of those things. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out my new business card. It was thick, cream-colored, with sharp, black, embossed lettering. I did not say a word. I did not smile. I simply placed the card on the cheap folding table in front of him, sliding it over the scratched laminate until it stopped, inches from his trembling hand. Elara Shaw, CEO, Shaw Legacy Designs. He looked down at the card. He looked back up at me. His world, his name, his office, his entire legacy. It was all mine. It was all, now, a tiny, insignificant, wholly owned subsidiary of my stupid little hobby. I turned my back on him. I walked out of the sterile room, past the stacks of his old chairs, and into the sunlight, leaving him alone, a ghost in a house that now belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm so glad we could share this journey. Let me know what you think in the comments. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from so we can all connect. Please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories and like this video if you enjoyed it. And if you really want to support the channel, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.